Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Bud Light panics, sales never recover, owner cuts ads, and admits defeat. From Bloomberg, the Bud Light hangover hasn't gone away. Despite a better performance outside the U.S., Anheuser-Busch InBev is still grappling with the controversy over Bud Light at a delicate time for the beer sector. And here's why from Bloomberg. Bud Light backlash will cost brand up to 15% of shelf space. We knew shelf space was going to collapse for Bud Light because demand isn't going to be there. They can have as many free beer promotions as they want to have. They can have as many discounts as they want to have. But if you're in a retail store and the product isn't selling, the retail stores can't put the stuff on the shelf. It's still on the shelf. If you notice, it's not selling on the shelf. And from MarketWatch, Bud Light sales will be permanently lower. From the Seattle Times, Bud Light's campaign to reclaim U.S. beer supremacy fizzles. And in this article, which is a rework of a Bloomberg article, they discuss how Anheuser-Busch spent millions of dollars to try to get their market share back, tried to get customers back, tried to move on from their disastrous ad campaign with Dylan Mulvaney, but it never actually worked. So what they're doing instead is they're putting money into other beer brands that they own, which makes sense. It's a total loss at the Bud Light company. This brand can't get saved. They reassociated the brand such that if you're the kind of person that wants to jump into a bathtub with Dylan Mulvaney or take a long romantic vacation with Dylan Mulvaney, then this is the beer for you. And there are people that want to take that vacation with Dylan Mulvaney. And of course, go have a great time. But most of the country don't want to do this. Most of the country are not interested in that lifestyle. And that's why the beer has collapsed. I went over on LinkedIn and I wanted to see how is Alyssa Gordon-Heinerscheid doing, because she's the person who came up with this great promotion over at Anheuser-Busch. And if you recall, she went on leave soon after the controversy exploded. Well, as far as we can tell, as of November 2023, that was it for her as vice president for Bud Light. She was vice president for Bud Light from August 2022 to November 2023. It's now October 2024, and she's not there. From the Seattle Times, Bud Light's campaign to reclaim U.S. beer supremacy fizzles. Bud Light was made for restaurants like the Green Rock Tap and Grill in Hoboken, New Jersey. It's a rowdy sports bar with dollar wing nights that in 2022 sold $250,000 of what was then America's best-selling beer, Bud Light. But since then, its Bud Light business has collapsed, taking in just $37,000 so far this year. That's more than an 80% drop, in a microcosm of how the brand owned by Anheuser-Busch InBev has struggled since April 2023. That's when transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney promoted the beer online and sparked a conservative backlash, and a backlash among normal people that did not want to be associated with Dylan Mulvaney. Quote, "It's definitely taken a hit," said Brandon Bovino, chief operating officer for the company that owns Green Rock and a handful of other bars in New Jersey. Customers switched to rivals such as Miller Lite, and Anheuser-Busch InBev's efforts to claw back market share, including more promotions, have not worked, he said. The same can be said nationally. To revive Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch has plowed millions into marketing, including TV ads starring Peyton Manning and a sponsorship deal with UFC. But it's still losing ground, according to interviews with distributors, bar owners, and industry experts, and data provided exclusively to Bloomberg News. In July 2024, Bud Light slipped to third place in the U.S. after rival Modelo and Michelob Ultra, another InBev brand, according to the analysis of Nielsen IQ data by industry consultant Bump Williams. Meanwhile, Bud Light's market share shrunk to 6.4% in the second quarter at more than 1,000 bars using point-of-sale software made by Union. That's down from nearly 12% before the backlash, almost a 50% cut nationally in bars. And why is this? Because bars also have a limited number of taps. It's more severe than the shelf space issue. It's one thing to not want to take up your shelf space with bottles of beer and cans that aren't selling, but it's another thing to take up a tap with something that's not selling. Most bars have limited numbers of taps. They don't have like extra taps around for beer that doesn't sell. It was more crucial for Bud Light to get revived in bars than it was even for shelf space, but they've lost that too. The company's stock overall has fallen about 6% this year. That lowered its market value to roughly $120 billion, about 40% below its high in 2019 before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. A 40% reduction down to $120 billion? Now, it's not all just because of Bud Light, but Bud Light is not helping them. The company has pitched investors on rebalancing its portfolio in America to focus on other big brands that are actually growing. At the top of the list is Michelob Ultra, a light beer with ads about spin class and kayaking rather than Bud Light's brew-fetching pets and pickup lines gone awry. They were in a lot better shape when they had pickup lines gone awry and wet t-shirt contests and Spuds MacKenzie than they are now. Earlier this year, Anheuser-Busch InBev Chief Executive Officer Michael Doukeris said Michelob Ultra was primed to keep increasing market share with its strongest activation yet coming this summer as the brand sponsors the U.S. Olympic team. And that's fine. It's good. If they have other brands that are still making money and still have a potential to continue to grow, that's good for them. That's what they should be doing. They burned the Bud Light brand, so it's on to the next brand. Has this company really learned its lesson? We don't know. We just know that they killed the Bud Light brand on their own. It wasn't our fault. It's what they did to their own brand with that negative association. It's part of a bigger push by Anheuser-Busch InBev to leverage the gains as it tries to move past Bud Light's downturn. Corona Cero, a non-alcoholic offering, is the first global beer sponsor for the Olympics. However, the company doesn't sell any Corona brand in America. When it acquired Grupo Modelo in 2013, it had to divest its U.S. distribution of Modelo and Corona. The shift to Michelob Ultra can be seen in recent national TV advertising. Over May and June, spending on Bud Light ads in the U.S. sank by about 80% from a year earlier, according to data from iSpot. During the same period, outlays for Michelob Ultra were 13 times higher than Bud Light. And this year through June, ad spend for Michelob Ultra is roughly 25% more than Bud Light, which usually ramps up marketing in the fall for football season. The Bud Light controversy erupted amid a decline in U.S. beer consumption. In recent years, young adults have been drinking less beer as they opt for hard seltzers and other options. Bud Light isn't immune, with its sales consistently falling, according to UBS analyst Sanjeet Ocha. Anheuser-Busch InBev grew through acquisitions, including mega deals for Anheuser-Busch in 2008, which gave it Bud Light and Budweiser, and SAB Miller in 2016, the world's second biggest brewer at the time. Now the conglomerate is a jigsaw puzzle of more than 500 brands with operations in nearly 50 countries. And it's those operations in all of those countries, especially in China and in South America, that got UFC's Dana White so interested in doing a deal with Anheuser-Busch to help them with Bud Light, because the UFC is trying to become a really robust global brand, and that's why he did the deal. It was obvious at the time. Eventually, their chief financial officer admitted that in the Wall Street Journal. Anheuser-Busch debuted Bud Light in the early 1980s in a response to the runaway success of Miller Lite. Silly advertising, including a series of spots with Spuds MacKenzie, a fictitious dog dubbed the original party animal, helped it reach #1 in the early 2000s. But the craft brewing boom and the rising popularity of spirits such as vodka slowed down the brand. And here came their biggest mistake. In July 2022, Anheuser-Busch InBev appointed Alyssa Heinerschied as vice president of marketing for Bud Light. She was the first female vice president in the beer's 40-year history and determined to attract younger drinkers, saying in a podcast and a YouTube interview that Bud Light had a fratty kind of out-of-touch humor. And the ironic thing about that is that she was out of touch. She wasn't looking at where the market was, where her existing customers were, how to please her existing customers. They could have created another version of Bud Light. They could have created a whole other brand name and not risked any of the existing customer base that they had. But she really didn't know what she was doing, unfortunately, and she seems like she was probably quite smart, but this was one of the dumbest things anyone could ever try to do. They also did no market testing on this. They didn't get anybody's feedback to see how people would respond. They could have done that for a few $1,000s or gone crazy and spent $20,000 or $25,000 on it and realized hey, this is something that would actually be very controversial. Let's not mess around because there's no benefit in taking that kind of a risk with an established brand. A number one beer brand, you're going to take that kind of a risk? And now that unfortunate choice and that unfortunate irresponsibility affects everyone else that comes after her. The following spring, the company enlisted social media influencers to create a buzz around Bud Light's contest during the March Madness college basketball tournament. Among them was Dylan Mulvaney, a transgender influencer. The brand sent Mulvaney a Bud Light can with his face on it, and Mulvaney posted on Instagram about it. Videos of upset fans dumping out Bud Light flooded the web as sales cratered. By June, rival Modelo, owned by Constellation Brands in the US, edged in front to become America's best-selling beer. So they lost their position in the market really almost immediately. The anti-Bud Light sentiment got so heated that delivery drivers reported being harassed. And it's never good to harass someone physically or with words or any way like that, but it's also not good to try these top-down measures to take established brands that are a promise between the company and the consumer and try to force political ideology on them. It's abusive, it's inappropriate, and now they see the kind of response they get. Of course, it's not just Bud Light. It's now happened with Target. It's now happened with multiple companies, especially in the last couple of months. John Deere, Tractor Supply, and now recently Toyota pushing back and saying, you know something, we're going to stay away from this kind of stuff. We don't need it in our company. And that's, of course, the right decision. No politics in business. AB InBev then shook up their marketing department. The brand, under the guidance of company veteran Todd Allen, turned back to familiar territory. They released ad campaigns about summer fun and football that included a Super Bowl spot with NFL greats Manning and Emmitt Smith. And that didn't work because the way they handled the storyline in most of the ads made people look stupid. It wasn't done well anyway. Bud Light inked a multi-year deal with UFC in October that was the mixed martial arts promoter's biggest ever sponsorship, topping a previous high of $175 million. Dana White told Tucker Carlson in a separate interview, quote, "If you consider yourself a patriot, you should be drinking gallons of Bud Light." As AB InBev struggles to revive the brand, some distributors worry that consumers have moved on and aren't coming back. One of them asking not to be named because Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch, they absolutely go after and threaten these independent distributors if, God forbid, they tell anyone the truth as to what's going on with the brands. I've seen it in article after article. They should let these distributors talk. It is not right. It's not against the First Amendment because Anheuser-Busch is not the government controlling their speech, but they are controlling the speech of the distributors. And they should just let the distributors talk. The distributors have been through a lot, and they haven't helped them enough. One of them, asking not to be named, discussing private business dealings, has had to cut staff and freeze wages after sales sank. Switching light beer brands is likely easier than with other drinks because they have little variation in taste. Steve Tatum, general manager for a distributor in Alabama, said Bud Light sales have steadied, but are still down about 10% since the backlash. Quote, "We might have had one or two accounts that took Bud Light out, but most retail customers have come around." Okay, they may have had one or two customers that took Bud Light out. Obviously, they had more than one or two customers that took it out, especially in Alabama. And when he says sales are down 10%, that must be like the most excited market for Bud Light because everywhere else they look, it's down at least 30%, at least 30%. And that can't be said for Green Rock, a destination for workers commuting home from nearby Manhattan. During a recent weeknight happy hour, co-manager Jake Obid chronicled the past 16 months. The brand took an immediate hit with customers shunning the beer, he said. But that died down and morphed into something that may be even more troubling for AB InBev. Quote, "I'd say even more people than not weren't necessarily upset with Bud Light," the 25-year-old said. "It's just become a thing that people just stopped. People got into the habit of drinking other beer." I've done more than 100 videos on the Bud Light story. There was a lot of things going on with Bud Light. It was an unbelievable, inconceivable marketing choice to take an established brand and without even testing it, to take such a radical chance with an established brand and an established customer base that already had an existing identity, and to do that with it. There have been other experiments they've done with packaging, but they never made it look like it was a mainstream change. because when people are associated with a brand, it becomes part of their personal identity. It's very important not to fool around with what people's expectations are when you have an established existing intellectual property or brand. This was such a colossal error, which wasn't just an error, it was an attempt to push ideology through established brands and then force people to accept their really unusual ideology represented by Dylan Mulvaney. That should not have been done. The concept of doing that is just straight up abusive. Target did a similar thing with trying to overrepresent Pride Month displays of over 1,000 different items in all of their stores to make it normal, to normalize a concept and a lifestyle through corporate branding. That is not the purpose of corporate branding. Corporate branding is there to convey a promise to a customer that you know you can count on so that every time you interact with that product and that brand, you know what you're going to get. We've seen it in entertainment, and we've seen the rollback coming from the massive failure of Bud Light and the massive failure of Target, where customers just said, look, we're not going to have any of this. You can keep all of your political ideology. If you want to try to sell us a product, you can try to sell us a product. If we like it, we'll buy it. If we don't like it, we won't buy it. And if you ruin it on your own, we're definitely not going to buy it. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.